there was a shortage of physicians in community hospitals, and we were being trained in other countries and recruited, being imported here. So that was the background. When I called my hospital administrator, I said, I don't have any money. He said, don't worry, just stay where you are. And they sent me a helicopter. So my first experience of the United States is lifting off in a helicopter, looking out of the window at the skyline in Manhattan, and saying, maybe they made a mistake. This is what Disney World must be like. In any case, 20 minutes later, I was in this very small town called Plainfield, New Jersey. Even for an Indian, it was Plainfield. But I immediately was taken to my hospital, and my first rotation was going to be in the emergency room. I reported to the nurse, who said she would call me when she needed me. I should go to my dorm and get over my jet lag, etc., etc. So I went to the dorm, and I switched on the television set with a remote control. Now, this was a very new experience for me because in India there was no TV when I left. So I'd never seen a television set, and suddenly I was seeing color on a TV set. Wimbledon, I still remember. And I was watching it when suddenly the program was interrupted, and there was a news bulletin, and the news bulletin said that there was a hold-up at a local bank, and some policemen had been wounded. One, in fact, had been killed, and they were being brought to the emergency room where I was going to start my rotation. Now, having been to a really good medical school, but never having seen a patient, I had my first panic attack. Shortly thereafter, the nurse called me, and she said, Dr. Chopra, we have an expiration. I had no idea what that word meant, but I didn't want to let on, so I said, you bet, I'll be there. And I bounded down the stairway, and the nurse showed me into a room where there were lots of machines, and a patient, a dead body with all kinds of tubes, wires, and I looked at the patient. You know, where I came from, there were lots of people and no machines. In this room, there were lots of machines and no people. But nevertheless, I made my first diagnosis. I looked at the patient, I looked at the nurse, and I said, he's dead. She said, I told you, we had an expiration. So at least I knew what the word meant, expiration, the opposite of inspiration. But I still was confused. If a patient is dead, why do you need a doctor? So I looked at the nurse. I said, if he's already dead, what do you want me to do? And she looked at me very sternly, pointed her finger like this, and she said, pronounce him. I'd never heard that before. Your soul can't leave your body unless a medical deity, MD, says, I release you, now you go. But then something clicked. And I said, she wants me to do the rituals that we doctors do. You know, doctors have their own rituals. We're like modern shamans. We wear white coats instead of leopard skins. We have a stethoscope around our head, even though, instead of feathers, even though I really don't think stethoscopes have any use anymore. We use Latin mantras instead of Aborigine mantras. And instead of dancing around a fire, we dance around CAT scanners. So I understood she wanted me to do a ritual. listen to the heart, examine the pupils, things like that. So having trained in India, where we speak English a little differently, it's more similar to English than American English, although it's Indian English, where the word for a flashlight is a torch. I asked my nurse if I could have a torch. And she looked at me, and by now there were other nurses outside. They were watching this whole show, and my nurse looked at the nurse outside and she said, "He wants a torch." And the nurse outside looked at me, she kind of looked me up and down, and she said, "Maybe he wants to do a cremation." So, introduction to American medicine. Here's what happened. Within 6 hours, I was totally at home in the emergency room. I suddenly discovered I had surgical skills, and I loved to see wounded people, and that the worse, the more gory the wounds, the more I relished the experience. I didn't want to leave. It didn't even occur to me that the patient could be suffering. All I wanted to do was make a diagnosis and practice my skills. And this went on for 24 hours, and finally the nurse said, "You need to get some rest." I said, "I don't want to go." She said, "No, you've got to get rest. Our interns and residents, they don't get enough sleep and they make big mistakes." So I said, okay. Very reluctantly I left and I went to my dorm. I couldn't get any sleep. I was reminiscing over my wonderful experience in the emergency room. But then I had a thought. I went to Main Street and I started looking at a television shop. There were lots of TV sets out there. Remember, I'd never seen a TV set in my life. So I'm looking at this window with 40 television sets, names that no longer are there, Magnavox and Sony and so on. And the salesperson came out and he said, "You really like those television sets, don't you?" I said, "I do." He said, "Why don't you come on in and buy one?" I said, "I don't have any money." He said, "What do you do?" I said, "I'm a doctor." He said, "Oh, come on, doc, come inside. All you have to do is sign this little piece of yellow paper and you can take it home." I said, "Are you sure?" He said, "Of course." So I signed a little yellow piece of paper and they delivered a television set to my dorm where there were already so many other sets. I went back to the emergency room for 24 more hours, and this time I went to an automobile agency and I asked for the manager. I said, "I'm a doctor. Do you have a yellow piece of paper?" He said, "Why?" I said, "I want that automobile." It was a Volkswagen Beetle for about $1,850. So I signed a yellow piece of paper and drove out in a brand new automobile. So this was the beginning of my American dream. Buy things that you don't need with money that you haven't earned to impress people that you don't know or don't like, and end up asking, why is there so much stress? So anyway, I finished my internship, and the next year I went to Boston and I trained in internal medicine, endocrinology. For those of you who are not familiar with the word, it's the study of hormones. And then I did subspecialty in neuroendocrinology, with one of the best neuroendocrinologists of our time, who's the president of the American Endocrine Society, Seymour Reichland. And we did lots of work on TRH and the hypothalamus and hormones that have to do with brain chemistry. And it was at this time that I had what I would say a few epiphanies. And the epiphany that I had was, I was always puzzled by the fact that you could get two patients who had the same illness, they saw the same physician, they got the same treatment, and they did not have the same biological response. We had something called prognosis, which is a bell-shaped curve, but you could never prognosticate the outcome in a given patient. In fact, sometimes the prognosis was so different, one person would die, the other one would recover. Any physician will tell you that, by the way, that prognosis is a statistical probability. It's like saying the average temperature in New York is 70 degrees. It doesn't tell me what the temperature today is right now in New York. Or the average income of a person in San Francisco is $100,000. It doesn't tell me what your income is if you live in San Francisco. So there was this nagging voice inside me that when we prognosticate, we might be introducing what I thought of then as the nocebo effect. You've heard of placebos, right? Placebos are inert pills that somehow create a biological response. Still a big mystery. But nobody was talking then about the nocebo response. When, Mrs. Smith walks into your office and you say, Mrs. Smith, you have such and such cancer, you have 6 months to live. And she, of course, thinks you're a medical deity, and she believes that, and then perhaps that sets off a cascade of events, including cortisol, adrenaline, many other little things in the body that end up becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. I didn't say this to anyone, but this was something that I was thinking about. And then what happened was that my own field of neuroendocrinology, there were some major breakthroughs occurring. I became friendly with a young fellow in neuroscience. Her name was Candice Pert. She later became the chief of neurochemistry at the NIH. And she was working with, at Johns Hopkins with a great scientist called Solomon Snyder. And she's now credited with having discovered the opiate receptor in the brain. Opiates are endorphins, and now everyone's heard of them. Endorphins are these little opiate-like compounds that are made in your brain, and they make you feel high. So when you run, you have opiate secretion and so on. And this was a very interesting time for us as fellows because we were measuring in the body neuropeptides. Neuro, because they're found in the brain, and peptides, because they're protein-like molecules. And one day Candice, my friend, she used the word molecules of emotion. And that was another epiphany for me. That, emotions have biological responses, and maybe the mediators for that are these molecules. And today we know a lot of these molecules, you've heard of them, they're part of our current cultural lingo. Serotonin, opiates, oxytocin, dopamine. In fact, a lot of the drugs that we use for depression are, as you know, serotonin uptake inhibitors and so on. But it was brand new then, molecules of emotion. Candice went on to write a book about the molecules of emotion. I did the introduction, and for me that was a revolution itself. Okay. So for me, that was a time. By the way, Candice passed away about a month ago, and she's made some major contributions in neuroscience and so on. And I had the privilege of speaking at her memorial. But for me, that was the beginning in my mind of the end of what I call phase 1 in medicine. Phase 1 in medicine and well-being is beginning to question what we call reductionism. Reductionism is a term that we use in science. When you reduce everything to its parts, then you examine the parts and then you figure out what's going on. So in medicine, reductionism means understanding literally the mechanisms of illness. How do bacteria replicate? And if I can figure out how they replicate, then maybe I have the antibiotic to kill that bacteria. How do cancer cells multiply? If I can figure that out, then I could use the appropriate chemotherapy, radiation to kill that cancer cell. And on and on. The culmination of reductionism is literally molecular biology, to understand mechanisms at the level of molecules and interfere with them. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong. It's one methodology, and it certainly works. If you have pneumonia, you need an antibiotic. If you have cancer, you might read the appropriate chemotherapy, as long as you remember that chemotherapy can be used selectively in selective cases that respond, and that chemotherapy is not the be-all, or radiation the be-all in cancer treatment. That's why I admire the work of people like David Agers, who are looking at other ways to understand mechanisms than the traditional ways, which work, as I said, but selectively. So for me, reductionism was useful in acute illnesses selectively, but I also started to question in my mind the model in which I was trained. It was not only a reductionist model, it was a mechanistic model, and it was based on the idea of the human body as a physical machine, something that Wayne questioned today, and I'll get into his idea of the soul also in a little while. But I started to question the very idea of the body as a physical machine, and not only as a physical machine, but as a physical structure. You know, structure is a thing, it's a noun. So in medical school, even today, although I haven't been recently to the anatomy classes in medical school, but in my time, the first thing you learned when you went to medical school was the subject of anatomy. And you know, models are created in our minds. We think science is a method for looking at reality, but science is a method for looking at a particular model of reality. And so the model of reality that I was given was, this is the human body, it's an anatomical structure. Now today, with all the things that we can do, PET scans and CAT scans and positron emission tomography and biosensors, which I'll talk about later, it's obvious that the body is not a structure, but it's an activity. Your body is not a thing, it's a verb. Things, actually nouns don't exist in nature. They're conventions of language. In nature, the whole universe, your body, your mind, and everything else is a verb. It's an activity. And even though for me this seemed like a good, brand new idea, I realized that it had been part of wisdom traditions for thousands of years. So the great Heraclitus, who's known as the father of modern medicine, and many others in ancient Greece thought of the human body much like a river. And you've heard, of course, the most famous expression of all, no man steps into the same river twice, because it's a new river and it's a new man. And it occurred to me that that's what your body is. The real you does not step into the same flesh and bones twice. And we'll come in a little while to who this real you might be. Because through just regular everyday experience, we are reshuffling the molecules of our body all the time. Eating, breathing, digestion, metabolism, how we experience the world through our five senses, elimination, thoughts, feelings, emotions, memories, desires, imagination, choices, activity, sleep, so many things that are influencing our body in every moment of our existence. It is a river. It looks the same, but it's never the same. Not a new idea, but for me at that time, a little epiphany. So I started looking at the science behind this. And I discovered that there were traditional sciences in the world that in fact were based on how the body flows through the experience of change. In medicine, when you go to medical school, the first thing you learn is not only the structure of the body, but in physiology you learn something called homeostasis. Homeostasis is how the body stays in a dynamic state of non-change in the midst of change. So even though your body looks the same, it's not the same. Right now, the body you're using to listen to my lecture is not the body you came in with a little while ago when you came into this room. And I'm not speaking metaphorically, I'm speaking literally. Even with one breath that you breathe in 10 to the power of 22 atoms from this biosphere. With every breath you breathe out 10 to the power of 22 atoms. They're coming from all the cells of your body. At the atomic level, you're literally breathing out bits and pieces of your heart and kidney and brain tissue. And technically speaking, we're all intimately sharing our organs with each other all the time. The great American poet Walt Whitman once said, "Every atom that belongs to you as well belongs to me." Every atom that belongs to you as well belongs to me. I spoke to mathematicians and physicist friends and said, you know, we have these things called radioactive isotope turnover studies. Can you share with me how our body recycles? And this is what I was told, but now you can actually look this up. Your stomach lining recycles every 5 days. Your skin is new every month. Your liver every 6 weeks. Your skeleton, which seems so hard and solid, such a physical structure, but your skeleton is calcium and phosphorus and carbon and oxygen that recycles every 3 months. The skeleton you have right now, at the level of elements, molecules, is not the same skeleton you had 3 months ago. And your DNA, your genes, which hold memories of millions of years of evolutionary time, the actual stuff that makes up your genes, the carbon, the hydrogen, the oxygen, the nitrogen, it comes and goes every 6 weeks like migratory birds. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about genetic indeterminism during the latter part of this talk, but for me this also triggered the idea, what are our genes? You know, we think of our genes as things as well, but genes are also activities that respond to the environment. Now the new science of epigenetics, they respond to emotions, relationships, food, diet, sleep, exercise. In fact, most of your genes, first of all, only 5% of your genes are active, and most of your genes are influenced in their activity by how you live your life, including your emotional life, personal relationships, and so on. But that's much later. This came, what I'm saying right now is brand new knowledge. it wasn't then, but I did wonder, what are genes? Because, 65% of your genes are the same as a banana. Did you know that? 80% of your genes are the same as a mouse. 98 point something percent of your genes are the same as a chimpanzee. This is the record of evolution in our bodies. About 3 weeks ago, I'm digressing. I was I was hosting Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist monk that, Mark, I'm sure you know who he is, and you probably met him. I was hosting him in New York, and he was doing some calligraphy. He was drawing a circle, and he said, as he drew the circle, he said, I invite my father to draw the circle with me. Then he said, I invite my mother to draw the circle with me. He said, I invite my ancestors, all of them, to draw this circle with me. I sat through that meditation, but afterwards I called my co-author, Rudy Tanzi, who's the head of the genetics lab at Mass General, and also the director of neuroscience there. I said, Rudy, in everything we do, our ancestors are alive in every cell of our body. In every cell of our body, our ancestors are alive. But I couldn't do anything. I couldn't give this talk. I couldn't draw that circle. And it's not just my human ancestors. It's my animal ancestors, my plant ancestors, my microbial ancestors, going back to the first living organisms on the rims of volcanoes, which, if you want to impress somebody, are called chemolitho-autotrophic hyperthermophiles. The continuity of life, going back to the beginning of time. And so, this whole idea that the body is not a structure, but an activity, and it's the activity of what? And I don't think you can get away from the fact that it's an activity of the entire ecosystem in which you are embedded. We are, all of us, ecosystems from the level of every single cell in the body. Now, depending on who you speak to, scientists will tell you we have about 600 trillion cells in the human body. I've had other estimates, so forgive me if this is not the right one. 600 trillion cells, of which only 6 trillion cells are human cells. The rest are bacterial cells. So again, structurally, you are a walking bacterial factory with a few human genes hanging on. And it's an amazing thing, this activity, this human body with its 600 trillion cells is the ultimate in multitasking. How does a human body think thoughts, play a piano, kill germs, remove toxins, make a baby all at the same time? How does it do that? How does it track the movement of stars and planets? Because your biological rhythms are the symphony of the whole universe. Literally. We have circadian rhythms, seasonal rhythms, lunar rhythms, all kinds of rhythms that track the music of the cosmos. There's music embedded in the universe, and your body dances to it even though you can't name the tune. So, for me was born the era of holism, that we had to start looking at the body. Yes, reductionism was not going to die. It was very useful. But as we begin a new era, then we begin to see that the old science doesn't die. It is included and transcended. So the old science doesn't become obsolete. It is included and transcended. You need antibiotics, but you don't need to use them as much as you did. Right now, the most dangerous infections in our hospital are what are called nosocomial infections, which are antibiotic-resistant organisms as a result of the use of antibiotics, etc. I'm not going to go on a litany of all the problems that we create, but all you have to do is watch a commercial or anything on television. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be for reflux of esophagitis or headache, and the symptoms start with anxiety and insomnia, and then move on to impotence, and then end with death. And then they say, oh, consult your doctor before you take this. So, I think reductionism is here to stay, but as we begin to expand our idea of what the human body is, an ecosystem, you as a conscious being in an ecosystem, and that ecosystem is your body as well, with the human cells and the microbial cells all kind of dancing together to create homeostasis or self-regulation. Homeostasis is self-regulation, self-directed. Actually, homeostasis would be a good word for healing, because healing conjures up in many people ideas of witch doctors and frauds and quacks. But if you say restoring homeostasis, then I think people will understand that if you sleep well, if you eat the right food, if you move, if you have healthy emotions and the right kind of relationships, that you have a better chance of creating balance in your body, what we call homeostasis. So this was a great era, and now we've seen, thanks to some of the funding, Mark, that you have provided to University of California, we've seen the effects of lifestyle and meditation and exercise and healthy emotions on things like telomerase, which is the enzyme that influences the length of your chromosomes, and in other words, your biological clock. We are now replicating that study in our institution with a group of scientists from Elizabeth Blackburn's team, and thanks to you as well. We're doing that. And recently we've also we've started a project with Eric Topol, digital medicine at Scripps, where in fact we can instantly monitor cardiac activity, brainwave activity, skin resistance, galvanic skin response, temperature, everything that's happening in your body instantly picked up by a biosensor about the size of a quarter that looks like a Band-Aid that you wear here. Your iPhone can pick it up and send it marked to a cloud immediately for analysis and get feedback instantly. So we've come a long way looking at this activity that we call the human biological organism that is influenced by eating, breathing, digestion, metabolism, elimination, sensory experience, feelings, emotions, thoughts, memories, imagination, and states of consciousness. Then this era number 2 that I'm talking about became even more significant to me when about 7-8 years ago I joined the Gallup organization as a senior scientist to look at health and well-being. So one of my research assistants is sitting right here in the audience, Daniel Poza. She would feed me information, and we started to look at Gallup studies on health and well-being in 5 major buckets. The first bucket was career well-being. So Gallup asked people in the world, do you love your job? I expect everyone here to say yes. But when you go across the world, only 20% of people say that they really love their jobs. In fact, another statistic that you might be, I shouldn't say amused, but alarmed to hear, is that more people die in our civilization at Monday morning at 9 o'clock because they hate their jobs. This is an extraordinary accomplishment for which only the human species can take credit. Presumably no other animal knows the difference between Monday and Tuesday. Here are some very interesting statistics. If your supervisor or your superior or your manager ignores you, you're likely to have 45% rate of disengagement. And within 6 or 7 months, you're likely to fall ill. If your supervisor doesn't ignore you, but criticizes you, you actually get better. Your rate of disengagement falls to around 20%, because you would rather be criticized than ignored. Now you exist. But if he or she notices a single strength that you have, your rate of disengagement falls to less than 1%. And your health improves. So at Gallup, we've been working with businesses to create teams that have emotional bonds, that complement strengths, and that have shared vision. And you can monitor the health and well-being of these people and say health and well-being is dependent on career satisfaction, on career well-being. The second bucket that we started to look at Gallup, and is now well documented, is called social well-being. So here's a very interesting thing. If you have a happy friend, your happiness goes up by 15%, your score. There are reliable ways of measuring this. But if your happy friend has a happy friend that you don't know, it goes up another 10%. And if your happy friend's happy friend has a happy friend, it keeps going up. And statistically, it looks like the best way to improve your well-being is to improve the capacity for happiness even in your enemies. If you want to get rid of your enemies and you want to improve your well-being, improve their capacity for emotional and physical and social and career well-being. More on that later. But now that we have social networks, now that we have a cloud, now that we have a global brain, an emerging global brain, where neural networks are being laid by the second, you can just send somebody an emoticon in South Africa and give them a dopamine hit. I mean, how about that? We are so hungry for attention, for affection, for appreciation, that we can use the new neural networks of the global mind, the global brain, to actually cause biological changes in people in remote areas. 10 years ago, this would be an outrageous idea. Similarly, you can give somebody stress and raise their blood pressure by doing other things, just by sending them an email. You can raise their blood pressure, cortisol, adrenaline, which compromises the immune system, etc., etc. In other words, states of consciousness match states of biology, and your mind is not just in your brain, no longer. Candice taught me that the mind is in all the cells of the body, because when we started looking at neuropeptides, we couldn't call them neuropeptides anymore. They're found in all the cells of your body. So today if you say, I have a gut feeling about such and such, your gut makes the same chemicals that your brain makes when you have those feelings. In fact, I would suggest you can trust your gut cells a little more, because your gut cells haven't yet learned how to doubt their thinking. When you say my heart is heavy with sadness, it's loaded with sad biomolecules. Your heart has the same receptors to the molecules that we make in our brain. Your body is, to quote Candice, your subconscious mind. Your mind is not squeezed into the volume of your brain. It just happens to speak in English with an Indian accent or whatever. It's in all the cells of your body. What is this thing we call the mind? You know, I've asked many scientists, can you define the mind for me? And most people haven't even come to a definition of the mind. Till I came across Dr. Dan Siegel, who's a neuropsychiatrist at UCLA, and so far this is the best definition of mind that I've heard. He says the mind is an embodied and relational process. I'll repeat that. The mind is an embodied, it's in my body, and relational process that regulates the flow of energy and information in an ecosystem. And our ecosystems keep enlarging. The ecosystem that is my body, the ecosystem that is my family, the ecosystem that is my friend, the ecosystem that is my professional colleagues, the ecosystem is the place where I work, the ecosystem which is my community, the world, the biosphere. So I think holism simply means we've stopped looking at biological organisms, particularly human beings, as skin-encapsulated egos bound by a semi-permeable membrane that is isolated and exists by itself. Your social well-being, your community well-being, your financial well-being, your career well-being, all influence your physical well-being. Because your physical well-being is not something totally dependent on you. In fact, I heard Wayne talk about love, and I work with scientists these days, say, just like I said, how do you define the mind? No scientist can come up with a definition of mind. Similarly, we ask scientists, what is love? And most of them, having been trained, it's not their fault. They've been trained in reductionism, say love, it's oxytocin. Okay? When in fact, love is the inseparability of life from life. We do know that when a mother bonds with a baby, or when people have emotional bonding, or when there is a great emotional connection between people, that in fact when we have the experience of love, your dopamine levels, your serotonin levels, they're all affected. And these so-called biomolecules are not only just biomolecules of emotion, they happen to be immunomodulators. They modulate the activity of your immune system. Not make it too aggressive, not make it too underactive, but fine-tune it. Which is a great concept these days in science, because everything that's happening in your body is so fine-tuned and with such precision to regulate you in the direction of homeostasis, whether it's blood pressure, hormone levels, body temperature, etc., etc. So now is the era where we can study the biology of emotions in a much more precise way. And part of it, of course, is the new neuroscience that allows us to map out the brain as we are experiencing different emotions. So for those of you who are not too familiar with the brain, here's what Dan Siegel and Rudy call the handy model of the brain. This looks like a brain, doesn't it? Handy model of the brain. This is your spinal cord. This is your reptilian brain, 300 million years old, which is called reptilian because it's found in reptiles. And reptiles have something called the startle center. If you make a sudden noise or go sudden movement next to a reptile, it'll either attack you or it'll slither away. We have this reptilian brain. As I said, it's 300 million years old in evolutionary time. And we do the same thing when we are threatened. We either attack or we run. It's called the fight-flight response. Inappropriate fight-flight responses are responsible for stress, which is the #1 epidemic of our time, directly or indirectly connected to cardiovascular illness, inflammation, immunocompromised biological systems, on and on, addictive behavior, so on. I remember when we were in medical school, the way we remembered the functions of the reptilian brain were the 4 F's: feeding, fighting, fleeing, and reproduction. So, which has been the best business for Hollywood and for the military-industrial complex. The reptilian brain. If you open your hand like this is your limbic brain. The limbic brain is also called the emotional brain because it's not found in reptiles, it's found in mammals. Mammals are so called because mama is the word for mother, and so they don't lay eggs, they nurture a baby in the womb, they nurse the baby, but mammals also play, mammals sing, mammals form close nurturant groups where there is love and empathy and compassion and joy and singing. Did you know that all mammals sing? So once we have the mammalian brain, if you are connected to the ecosystem, then your limbic brain goes into resonance. So my limbic brain and Wayne's limbic brain has frequently resonated because we experience love and compassion and joy and empathy and equanimity. And we are regulating each other's emotions, but we're also regulating each other's biological states because those emotions are in fact connected with homeostasis. If I was feeling angry, resentful, grief, shame, guilt, depressed, my limbic system would influence my hormones in a way that I would not be making dopamine and serotonin and opiates, I'd be making cortisol and adrenaline and God knows what else. Okay, so my emotions have a lot to do with my biological state. And finally we have this cortical brain, which is only 4 million years old, by the way. So this is 300, this is 100, this is 4 million years old. The cortical brain gets activated when you self-reflect, when you say, who am I? The questions that Wayne was asking earlier. What do I want? What's the purpose of my existence? Do I have a soul? Does God exist? What is the meaning of death? Etc. But also the cortical brain is what we have activated to create science and art and architecture and music. In fact, the cortical and limbic brain together is an amazing combination. In India we call it yoga, the yoga of love and the yoga of creativity and the yoga of knowledge. Yoga, by the way, is a word which means union, going back to the source. Source, which source? Yourself. So this is the era of holism. One of the things that we did study a few years ago at the instigation of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, again, Mark, you've been a big supporter of all these wonderful initiatives, but His Holiness said to social scientists, he said, you know, all you talk about is stress. Has anyone ever done a study on happiness? So off went our social scientists, and 2 years later, they came back with what they call the happiness formula. So since I have the opportunity to be with all of you today, I would like to share with you the happiness formula. Here it is. H is equal to S plus C plus V. H stands for happiness. S stands for set point in the brain. The set point in the brain is a brain mechanism, presumably a neural network that has been programmed to see things as problems. So if you look at the world and you see a problem, then you have a set point for depression. If you look at the world and see an opportunity, you have a set point for happiness. And so there's now a lot of debate whether it's nurture, nature, because it seems our set point determines 50% of our daily happiness experience. And it seems that the set point is determined during our very early days, infancy almost, like first year or 2 years in life, when a baby bonds emotionally with its parents, but particularly with its mother. A baby does not understand language as in linguistics, but a baby understands language which is emotional. A baby looks at its mother, looks at her eyes. Is she looking friendly or not? Looks at her face, is she smiling? Looks at her posture, open or not? The tone of her voice. and the baby's neural networks mirror the neural networks of its parents, so the baby's set point is determined during its emotional development right in the beginning of life. So when you hear this news that your set point is already determined for you, it can sound very depressing, right? Because you had nothing to do with it. You say, I'm screwed. Well, can you change your set point? And the answer is yes, you can change your set point through mindfulness practices, through meditation, through self-awareness, through self-reflection, through transcendence, through conscious choice-making, and many, many, many other ways to change the long-term, what were called the networks that connect with each other. It's called long-term potentiation. You can change it through mental practices, which I just mentioned, particularly mindfulness and meditation and transcendence. Anyway, that's 50% of your daily happiness experience. 10 to 12% of your happiness experience comes from the second part of the formula, C. C pertains to conditions of living. So, do you have lots of money? Or do you have very little money? And what we know now, that conditions of living influence your happiness by about 10 to 12% on a daily basis. So of course, if you're extremely poor, you will be unhealthy and unhappy because it's a lot of stress for you. But having lots of money doesn't guarantee that you'll be happy, because you could still have the same stress. The poor and the rich share one thing in common: they think about money all the time. So, if you win the lottery, you will be very happy in the beginning, but in about 6 months, your happiness will plateau. In 1 year, it will return to its baseline state. Doesn't change your set point. The third part of the formula, remember, H is equal to S plus C plus V. It's voluntary actions. It's the choices we make on a daily basis. And scientists talk about two kinds of choices that we make. These are social scientists. The first choice is for personal pleasure. So guess what's the number one choice for personal pleasure in the United States? Anyone?
Food.
Anyone? Food is number 2. So you're pretty close. Sex is number 3. If it was number 1, we'd be a healthier nation. The number one choice for personal pleasure is shopping. We have a word to describe human beings. We call them consumers. An ugly word to describe a luminous stardust being whose atoms were born in the crucible of stars billions of years ago. But there it is. So do choices that give us personal pleasure make us happy? The answer is yes. But the happiness lasts only for a few days after the experience. If you want real happiness, then you have to have fulfillment. And that means you have to have meaning and purpose in life. You have to have creative expression. You have to have relationships where you know how to make other people happy. In fact, all the science shows that the fastest way to be happy is to make somebody else happy. And you don't have to buy them a new iPhone. You can give them a little attention, which means listen to them, a little appreciation, notice something good about them, and affection, which means you care about them. And you start this process of limbic resonance and the whole cascade of events that not only makes you happy, but improves your health and well-being. Okay, so we've talked about holism as the second era. But that's not the whole story. You know, in wisdom traditions, they say that human beings are more complex creatures than the rest of the biological organisms in nature. Human beings are happy, but they worry that they won't be happy in the future. Human beings worry about old age, infirmity, death. Human beings remember the past and they are victimized by the past. They hold resentments and grievances. At our conference, there was one scientist who said, if you kick a dog, the dog will also remember and 5 years later may attack you. But unlike a human being, the dog won't plan for 5 years how to get even. So we are complex creatures. What can I say? Besides that, as we get older, certainly existential dilemmas creep up on us. So even if we've never had a spiritual longing or a spiritual life, it soon starts to influence you, because death is stalking us. Everyone. Look behind you, the Prince of Death is right there. When you look again, he is closer. We are all on death's row. The only uncertainty is the method of execution and the length of reprieve. And so we worry. We worry about this. And for this, there's a deeper longing that we have, without which we cannot experience wellness or wholeness or health. It is no accident that the word health is related to the word holy. Holy, wholeness, health, healing is the return of the memory of wholeness. And the great wisdom traditions of the world say that, your identity can be your skin-encapsulated ego. Your identity can be your ecosystem, your social network, your personal relationships. Perhaps you have a bigger identity. So, in the last part of my talk, I want to talk to you about this bigger identity, without which our healing is not going to be complete. I've thought about this bigger identity for all my life. But about 3 years ago, as I was traveling the country, on a book that I had just finished, it's called God, A Story of Revelation. And it tracks how human beings have thought of the mystery of their existence from the time of the Old Testament to Einstein's time. So it has the story of St. Paul, other great wisdom tradition leaders like Rumi and Hafiz that you quoted, St. John of the Cross, and many others, and ends with Einstein. And so I was traveling the country, came to Los Angeles, where I was picked up by my son and my then 5-year-old grandson. His name is Krishan, we call him Krishu. And as we got out of the airport, little Krishu is only 5 years. He says to me, Dada. Dada is the Indian word for grandfather on the father's side. He said, Dada, what is dark energy? 5-year-old kid. I said, what do you know about dark energy? He said, it flows through the night sky. Very poetic. So what else do you know about dark energy? He said, it's 70% of the universe. I said, boy, this 5-year-old kid is telling me all this stuff. So we get out of the airport, we're driving in Santa Monica. I roll down the window. It's a beautiful day, we can see the ocean. And he looks at me and he says, how did they make the ocean? I said, who make the ocean? He said, they. I said, no, Krishu, I'm not going to tell you how they made the ocean if you don't tell me who's they. So he thinks for a little bit. He reframes the question. He says, how did the ocean get made? Smart little kid. So I said it got made the same way that the earth got made. It's a piece of rock. It fell off a big star. And that's earth and ocean. There are other pieces like that in our solar system. Let me ask you the question now. How many planets do we have in the solar system? He says, well, if you count Pluto, there are 9. And if you don't count Pluto, there are 8. I said, that's right. And where did the solar system come from? He said, from the galaxy. I said, yeah. Which galaxy? He said, Milky Way. I said, that's true. Where did the galaxy come from? He said, other galaxies? I said, that's true too. And where did the other galaxies come from? He said, the universe? I said, that's true. And where did the universe come from? And without batting an eyelid, he said, from another dimension. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been thinking about this for 30 years. And this kid just summarizes everything in less than 3 minutes. So I said, I'm Indian, so you can't help it. I'm thinking, who's incarnating right now? And all kinds of names are going through my head, Einstein and Galileo and Newton. And I said, how do you know all this? He said, oh, it's my Pokemon. I share this with you because, one of the things Salesforce does is connect people through the emerging neural network. And if you're not up to speed with the Pokemon, you're out of the collective zeitgeist at the moment. And you don't know what the heck is going on. But the second reason I share this story with you is that my grandson raised two very important questions in today's science. They're called open questions. Open questions because we have no answer. Okay? And they could be the two most important questions of our existence. The first open question in science today is, what is the stuff of the universe? What's it made up of? And the short answer is, we don't know. Why don't we know? Because, as my grandson said, there's all this dark matter and dark energy. Dark energy is what Einstein called the cosmological constant. It's this strange energy that is moving galaxies apart and ripping space faster than the speed of light. So the cosmic horizon is 47 billion light years away from us, from where we are, or from any location. 47 billion light years means it would take 47 billion years for light to come from there to here. It's not only what's across, it's not only unknown, it's the unknowable. Because by the time light gets here, our entire galaxy will have burnt itself up into the heat death of absolute zero. So that's 70% of the universe. 25%, almost 26% is dark matter. What is dark matter? We don't know. We have no idea what it is. Why? Because it's not atomic. Unlike atoms, which make up your body, my body, this little gizmo that I'm holding in my hands, everything that we see is atoms. But dark matter, which is 26% of the universe, is not atomic. It doesn't reflect light, absorb light, emit light. Why do we call it matter? Well, because it bends space-time in the same way as regular matter. And therefore, is the gravity, the scaffolding of galaxies. And were it not there, you and I would disappear right now because gravity holds us together. Again, if you look at the current cosmological theories, gravity doesn't fit with what is called the current model of science. It's called the current model that we have in science. Gravity is unexplainable. But most of it is dark matter, invisible, not material. Well, that leaves 4% of the universe that is atomic, of which 99.99% is either hydrogen and helium or invisible interstellar dust. So the visible universe, which includes all the galaxies, billions of them, and I just read yesterday that astronomers believe, and this is from yesterday's news, that there are 40 billion habitable planets in our galaxy alone. Okay? So in our galaxy, possibly 40 billion habitable planets. but then billions of galaxies with, as Carl Sagan would say, billions and billions and billions and billions of stars, and now trillions of planets, trillions and trillions of planets. All of that is 0.01% of what's there. The rest is either unknown or unknowable. And now it gets even more complicated. Because atoms, as Wayne was saying earlier, are not material things. They are fluctuations of energy and information that emerge from an infinite void. You quoted, I heard you, Max Planck, when he said mind is the matrix of matter. So, if you really want to know what the stuff of the universe is, you'll end up by saying it's non-stuff. All of it is non-stuff. The dark matter, the dark energy, the atomic matter. As you go beyond the appearance of molecules, you enter a subatomic cloud. Go beyond the cloud, nothing. And then the question is, what is this nothing from where we all come? Was it just an empty void, or could it be the womb of creation? Is it possible that nature goes to exactly the same place to create a galaxy of stars, a cluster of nebulas, a rainforest, a human body, a thought, an atom? Just 2 days ago, I was in private communication with Freeman Dyson. For those of you who don't know, Freeman is now 90 years old, chair professor at Princeton University, one of the most important theoretical scientists, theoretical physicists of the century, colleague of John Wheeler, and very well known and respected, father of what is called quantum electrodynamics. And in a personal communication, Freeman Dyson sent me an email 2 days ago. He said there are 3 mysteries that have confounded him all his life. 3 mysteries. The first is atoms move unpredictably. Atoms move unpredictably. You cannot predict which atom or subatomic particle will come out of the void or disappear into the quantum vacuum. The second mystery that has haunted him all of his life is our own consciousness, because we cannot explain it. Everything that we call experience is ultimately only an electrical impulse going to our brain. That's it. So right now what's going to your brain is photons when you look at me. When you hear me, what goes to your brain from your auditory apparatus is electricity, an action potential, taste, smell, whatever you call it. In the end, in the brain there's only electrochemistry. But you're not experiencing electrochemistry, you experience a 3-dimensional reality in space and time. So, where is that experience? If I ask you to think of a beautiful sunset and you see an image, where is that image? Or when you look at a rose, where is the color of the rose? Is it there? If it's there, it's only colorless photons. What's hitting your eyes is photons. Where is the world? Where does it exist? We can say consciousness, but then where is the consciousness? And so this, to scientists now, neuroscientists who think about this is called the hard problem. A hard problem because we don't even have a theoretical explanation for our own consciousness. And the third mystery that Freeman Dyson mentioned, he said the third mystery is a universe with such precise laws and fine-tuning that it is hospitable to mind and life. 3 mysteries. Atoms moving unpredictably, the mystery of our own consciousness, and a universe fine-tuned with precise laws. If they were not fine-tuned by, a few decimal points, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So fine-tuned for mind and life. In the same email he shared with me, which I'm going to treasure because, I didn't think he would even respond to me. He says, I don't understand these mysteries, but I think they are connected. I think they are connected. So now, if you go back to the great scientists of the last century, Max Planck, Wolfgang Pauli, Schrödinger, Heisenberg, they all seem to say that consciousness is actually fundamental in the universe. That space-time, energy, information, and matter are emergent properties of consciousness. That consciousness conceives, governs, constructs, and manifests the world. Wayne called it God. I'm kind of reluctant to call it because it's such a loaded word. People go to war just for the definition. So, I'm happy with calling this underlying ground of our existence consciousness. There's a universe, and then there is consciousness that makes us aware of the universe. And where science is struggling, spiritual wisdom traditions have said, you can have the experience of this consciousness. Transcend, go beyond the subject-object split. Make love, compassion, empathy, joy, equanimity your priorities. Do something for the ecosystem in which you have evolved. And find that part of you that is not in space and time, and you will lose the fear of death. And if you look at all the spiritual traditions of the world, that's what they have in common. Transcendence, the emergence of platonic truth, love, compassion, joy, equanimity, empathy, loss of the fear of death, what I would call epistemic humility. Epistemic humility. Epistemology is that science of, is that philosophy, aspect of philosophy which says the human nervous system is not necessarily the most developed organ in evolution to give us a clue to the mysteries of life. Evolution was there for the survival of the species, not for uncovering truth. And reverence for our existence. The Africans say Ubuntu, I am because you are. There is no me without you. And when we have these experiences, then only we can say that healing is complete. Healing is physical, healing is emotional, healing is in the mind, intellectual. We need to feed our hunger. Hunger for food, hunger for love, hunger for compassion, hunger for empathy, hunger for joy, hunger for peace, but ultimately, hunger for meaning. No neural network will process meaning for you. Only you can do it for yourself by your own self-reflection. When you ask yourself, who am I? And then ask yourself, who is asking the question, who am I? Who's this consciousness embedded in this entire ecosystem? Wayne quoted Rumi a lot, so let me quote him too. Rumi said, who am I in the middle of all this thought traffic? If you know the answer to that, it might be your ticket to freedom. He also said, we come spinning out of nothingness, scattering stars like dust. Look at these words, spinning out of nothingness. This is within your power. You are a luminous stardust being that was born in the crucible of stars. And you have awareness. This is your most precious gift. And as you expand your awareness, you could be a skin-encapsulated ego, you could be your business network. You know, people go to meetings all the time, not even listening to the meetings, they're networking. Okay, that's part of your ecosystem. But as you expand your ecosystem, there's no boundaries. This is the whole universe itself. This has to be our new tribe. The new tribe which has the same mantra, Ubuntu, I am because you are. But you are includes all tribes, all sentient beings. It includes our little planet, a little speck of dust in what seems a mindless void, but in fact could be the womb of creation. It includes the whole universe. It is the mystery of our existence. And as we expand our awareness, the world becomes a projection of our state of awareness. So in the remaining 5 minutes, I want to show you a 2-minute video. Mark was very gracious to link me with some people where we're going to find a way to heal the 2 major epidemics, or make a dent in the 2 major epidemics of our time. The first is obesity and diabetes, which is the direct or indirect cause of so many things, so many chronic illnesses. And the second is malnourishment across the world. So 50% of the world obese and diabetic, 50% hungry. Can I show you the video? It's 2 minutes, and then I want to conclude.
There has never been a time when obesity has been a more serious problem. It's all around us, affecting children and adults alike. Despite our efforts at watching our weight, we are still losing the fight against obesity. But while the world around us is grappling with losing weight, there is a more serious problem that we seem to have forgotten. A problem that affects those less fortunate than us. According to the World Health Organization, the single greatest threat to the world's public health is hunger and malnutrition. Every year, millions of children and adults die due to lack of access to basic nutrition. So here's the situation. There are millions succumbing to obesity, and at the same time, millions dying from being severely undernourished. How do we restore balance in a world faced with a weight problem spanning 2 extremes? Presenting the Weightless Project, an initiative where any attempt at shedding a few pounds results in funds that will help the undernourished gain vital weight that could possibly save their lives. Every minute on the treadmill, every calorie burnt on a run, or even something as simple as joining a gym could change someone's life. This project helps you and the world get healthy. If any of us ever needed another reason to work out, this is it. Hi, I'm Deepak Chopra, and I support the Weightless Project. To know more, log on to choprafoundation.org or weightlessproject.org.
This is the first announcement, Mark, and I'm wearing all these biosensors, as you know. Jawbone, Fitbit, Basis, they've donated money so that for every 1,000 calories that you lose, there'll be $1 going to feed a child, or right now to feed the children in the Philippines. So if you can log on, and if you have a device, then we'll record your calorie expenditure, and a child will be fed somewhere in the world. And then we'll get all the gyms. Call to action, you're going to help me with this. Okay, create a global movement to solve both epidemics, malnutrition, obesity, and malnutrition. They're both malnutritions. So I have about 4 slides to show you in the remaining 1 minute. So This is how I would see the movement of health and well-being. Reductionism, phase 1. Phase 2, holism, including the ecosystem. Phase 3, biosensors, biotechnology, and digital medicine. Phase 4, personalized medicine, and phase 5, global medicine. This is the future of medicine, but it's also the future of technology. We're working with, so that's, those slides are about the different buckets of spiritual and physical well-being. But let me conclude by showing you that we are very close to personalized medicine with bioregulation, a deeper understanding of neuroplasticity, stem cells and cloning technology, but using your own stem cells. A colleague of mine, Neil Thies at Mount Sinai, has shown that you can clone your own. In fact, you have stem cells in your own circulation as I speak. Genetic modulation, but also influencing genetics through environment, the whole era of epigenetics. According to Rudy Tanzi, and perhaps you'll correct me on this, only 5% of our genes, disease-related genes, are 100% penetrant. Only 5% of disease-related genes, there are others you can influence. Nanobots, little computers, ultimately quantum computers, that you can instruct to roam the blood vessels of your body and induce healing, and ultimately states of consciousness that would be correlated with states of biology. Algorithms for social unrest, crime rate, hospital admissions, accidents, quality of leadership. We've just finished this study. The biosensor is about this big. It's the size of a Band-Aid. You wear it here, picks up your brain waves, picks up your heart rate variability, about 12 other biomarkers on your iPhone, transmits it to Scripps, instant feedback. And we could create a global movement that finally connects who we are and the cosmos. Thank you very much.
I love so much, Deepak, that you started your discussion with your early life as a physician. As Chancellor at UCSF, I oversee an amazing academic medical center, a graduate program, and professional school. So we have one of the best medical schools in the world. If you look back at the time of your training and you were running a medical school, what's the most important thing that you would want to include in the curriculum to train clinicians who are ready for the world you just described in those slides?
Two things, actually, not one thing. One is I'd make sure that the health of my residents and interns was optimal. You can't have somebody taking care of very sick people who's not healthy themselves. So the ancient dictum, heal thyself. I would make the rules and regulations such that interns and residents and fellows are given the opportunity to be healthy themselves. And the second thing is I would make rotations for medical students and residents in alternative, it's not a good word, in integrative ways of looking at things. We do that at our center. We have students from UCSD coming to us.